This video is sponsored by Flowkey. Today I'm going to show you some songs which you can use as references for the sound of different musical scales. For example, the sound of the whole tone scale, or the Mixolydian scale, or the natural minor. When you hear these scales being used in other pieces of music, you want to be able to recognise that sound, identify it. So these examples I'll give you today are a good way of internalising the sound of that scale. So let's work our way through a whole range of Western music scales, starting with Western music's favourite musical scale, the major scale. A song that literally explains the sound of the major scale is Do Re Mi from The Sound of Music.
Do re mi fa sol la ti.
But another common melody which literally just descends down the major scale is the sound of church bells, of wedding bells, which literally start at the top of a major scale and climb down. So that's the major scale, but what about the minor scale? Well, with minor scales, there's actually various minor scales. There's different variations. The most common minor scale is probably the natural minor scale, otherwise known as the Aeolian scale or Aeolian mode. And a song which literally climbs up this scale repeatedly is Everything Means Nothing to Me by Elliott Smith.
Everything means nothing to me. Everything means nothing to me.
The only issue with that example though is that song doesn't stay in B flat minor throughout its entire runtime, but a song that does stay in the natural minor key throughout is Losing My Religion by R.E.M., which stays entirely in the key of A minor, in the key of A natural minor.
That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion.
So that's the natural minor scale, but as I mentioned before, there's different variations of the minor scale that we use. And the second most common type of minor scale is the harmonic minor scale, which is exactly the same as natural minor, apart from the 7th degree has been raised up one extra note. So this is the natural minor, and this is the harmonic minor. Just that last note, second to last note, has been changed. And it gives it quite a classical sound to me, I think, which comes across in the example we're going to look at, which isn't a classical piece of music, but is inspired by classical music. It's Plug-in Baby by Muse. So we've looked at a couple different minor scales now, but a minor scale which is almost like a simplified form is what's called the minor pentatonic scale. That's a very common scale amongst guitarists, and a song which is actually completely building its melody from the minor pentatonic scale is Shape of You by Ed Sheeran.
I'm in love with your body, every day discovering something brand new.
But a song that actually opens with a run up the minor pentatonic scale is Long, Long, Long by the Beatles, which starts by running up the G minor pentatonic scale. So that initial climb is literally a climb from bottom to top of the G minor pentatonic scale. So that's the minor pentatonic, but there's also the major pentatonic, which, much like how the minor pentatonic is a simplified form of the minor scale, the major pentatonic is a simplified form of the major scale. And a song that climbs once again from the bottom to the top of this scale is My Girl by The Temptations. The guitar riff we get in the intro is climbing from the bottom to the top of the C major pentatonic scale. Flowkey is a really fluid, intuitive way to learn songs and to learn how to read sheet music at the piano. Let me show you how it works. I've got it in hold mode at the moment, which means it's basically waiting for me to play the correct note. And if I play the wrong note, it knows it's the wrong note, so it won't continue. So it's giving you instant feedback on whether you're playing it correctly. We've also got this helpful display at the top showing a top-down view of the piano, so if you're not as fluid at reading sheet music, you can still work out how to play it. Whether you've been playing piano for years or you're just getting started, why not try out Flowkey for free with a 1-week free trial? To get started today, follow the link down below. So we've looked at some fairly common scales, but now let's look at some of the less orthodox scales. Let's look at the whole tone scale. And the whole tone scale does exactly what it says on the tin. It climbs up whole tones. Every step in the scale is a tone, resulting in quite a mysterious scale. And a song that uses it quite prominently is You Are the Sunshine of My Life by Stevie Wonder. In the keyboard intro, on the second chord of the intro, we get this climb up the whole tone scale. That climb there is going all the way up the whole tone scale. Another unorthodox scale we can talk about is the octatonic scale, which is also referred to as the diminished scale. In fact, it has quite a few different names and quite a few different variations, but the version we're looking at is the scale that goes tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, up the keyboard like that. So starting with C, for example, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone. And for any Radiohead fans watching, you've probably already clocked what the song example is. It's Just by Radiohead, which begins by climbing up the octatonic scale. The next scale we'll talk about is the blues scale, which is actually a variation of the minor pentatonic scale. So the minor pentatonic scale, for example in A, would sound like that. The blues scale adds one extra note between the 4th and 5th degree. That note there. And I'll give you 2 examples for this. A song which literally darts down the A blues scale is Feel Your Heart by David Bowie. At the end of that song, and I think in the middle as well, Rick Wakeman races down the scale over 2 octaves. Like that. My only hesitation with that David Bowie example though is that although Rick Wakeman's going down the A blues scale, the song's not actually in the key of A, it's in the key of E. So a more pure example would be at the end of Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, where they climb down the E flat minor blues scale. So now let's talk about some modes. Let's talk about Dorian. So Dorian is very similar to the natural minor scale, but has a raised 6th degree. So rather than that 6th note, we have that raised up to there. And a great example of E Dorian, of the Dorian scale, is Riders on the Storm by The Doors. That descending line is working its way down the E Dorian scale. Now let's talk about the Mixolydian scale. Now this example isn't going to be climbing up or down the scale like many of the other examples we've looked at today, but it does stay in Mixolydian for its entire duration. It stays in E Mixolydian throughout. And this example is Bittersweet Symphony by The Verve. That entire string melody and the subsequent vocal melody is all sticking to the Mixolydian scale. Now another great example of Mixolydian, and actually the piece that first introduced me to the sound of Mixolydian, is the Sims 1 build theme. The entire piece is in Mixolydian, but it just keeps changing which key it's in, which Mixolydian scale it's using. Charles Cornell already did a great video about this piece, so do check that out afterwards. So obviously there are loads of scales that we haven't talked about here, but these are probably some of the most common examples that you might want to listen out for. But one last scale that I'll show you is the chromatic scale. And I've saved this for last because in a way this isn't really a scale. The chromatic scale was literally just going up every note, going up a semitone each time basically. But it's good to be familiar with the sound of that so you can spot chromatic movement in pieces of music. And a song which really goes to town with chromatic is The Entrance of the Gladiators, which you probably know best as the circus music. It sounds like this. That main melody and many of the elements of the music before and after that are basically moving up and down the chromatic scale, literally moving every time by a semitone. So that's 11 different scales and examples you can use to remember the sound of those scales. As I mentioned before, there's obviously plenty other scales I could have talked about. So if you can think of another good example, another sort of archetypal example of a scale, then do leave it in the comments down below. And a big thank you as always goes to everybody who supports me on Patreon, including an extra special thanks going to these wonderful people.